It all began with a leak that shook the very foundations of international politics. In the dimly lit offices of Brussels, whispers emerged about a confidential memo that had been circulated among NATO allies. The memo contained shocking orders from none other than Donald Trump himself. His demand was clear: impose crushing tariffs on African nations, targeting oil, gold, and strategic resources. The intention was unmistakable: cripple Africa's economic independence and tighten the West's grip over the continent. But this time, Africa was not the same. And at the heart of this storm stood a man who refused to bow down: Ibrahim Traoré, the young, determined leader of Burkina Faso. With a firm voice, he described Trump's plan for what it truly was: economic warfare disguised as diplomacy. His words ignited a fire that quickly spread far beyond the borders of his country. For decades, Africa's minerals had been exploited to fuel Western economies. Gold from Burkina Faso, uranium from Niger, oil from Nigeria, cocoa from Ghana, all taken cheaply while the people remained poor. But now the story was changing. Traoré, backed by the alliance of Sahel states, declared openly that Africa would not accept new chains. If the West raised tariffs, Africa would cut off resources entirely and find new partners on its own terms. This bold stance sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. Western leaders, accustomed to obedience, suddenly faced defiance. Markets trembled, oil traders panicked, gold prices spiked overnight. The mere suggestion that Africa might redirect its wealth to Asia, to China, or Russia was enough to terrify Washington and Brussels alike. For the first time in generations, the balance of power seemed to tilt ever so slightly away from the West. Inside Burkina Faso, the people rallied behind their president. In Ouagadougou's central square, thousands waved flags and sang songs of sovereignty. "We will not kneel," shouted a miner, holding a small bag of gold dust in his hands. Across the Sahel, from Mali to Niger, ordinary citizens felt a surge of pride. Traoré had not just defended Burkina Faso, he had defended Africa's dignity. The leaked memo revealed even darker intentions. Trump's plan was not limited to tariffs alone. NATO allies were reportedly asked to prepare strategies to disrupt African shipping routes in the Mediterranean, choking off trade and isolating the continent. But Traoré anticipated this. He began forging new agreements with Russia and China, ensuring that Africa's gold and oil would have secure markets regardless of Western sanctions. It was a chess game, and for once the pieces were moving in Africa's favor. As the world watched, other African leaders started speaking out. Guinea declared its support for Burkina Faso. Mali and Niger joined Traoré in signing a new pact of economic resistance. Even leaders beyond the Sahel began to reconsider their alliances. Could this be the dawn of a united Africa, finally free from Western domination? Western media immediately launched a campaign against Traoré. Newspapers branded him a dictator. Television anchors warned that he was dragging Africa into chaos. Yet on the streets of Lagos, Dakar, Johannesburg, and Bamako, the people cheered his name. For them, he represented something long forgotten: courage in the face of empire. Meanwhile, intelligence reports revealed a growing panic inside Western capitals. Europe, already facing an energy crisis, could not afford to lose access to Africa's resources. The United States, locked in competition with China, feared losing its grip on strategic minerals. And yet, their old tactics, sanctions, threats, propaganda, seemed powerless against the rising tide of Pan-African defiance. This was more than an economic battle. It was psychological. For centuries, the West dictated terms, while Africa obeyed. Now a young leader from one of the continent's poorest nations was daring to say no, and millions were listening. Analysts warned that if Africa stood firm, the global economic system itself could be shaken. The question spread like wildfire across the internet, across classrooms, across marketplaces. Has the West nightmare just begun? Was this the first chapter of a new African awakening? Or would the West retaliate with force to crush this rebellion before it spread further? The stakes were no longer just about tariffs. They were about the soul of a continent and the future of a world order. As the crisis deepened, Traoré moved from words to action. In Ouagadougou, he signed a decree that immediately froze foreign mining contracts across Burkina Faso. Gold, uranium, and oil fields, once controlled by multinational corporations, were now declared national property. The announcement sent shivers down Wall Street. Shareholders in London and New York woke up to billions in potential losses. For the first time, Africa was not just negotiating, it was reclaiming. The ripple effect spread fast. In Mali, authorities followed suit, halting French uranium operations. Niger, too, announced new restrictions on Western companies. One by one, nations across the Sahel joined the resistance. This was no longer just about tariffs, it was about liberation. The West, long confident in its control, suddenly faced the possibility of an Africa determined to stand on its own. In response, NATO leaders gathered in emergency meetings. Economic experts warned of catastrophic consequences if Africa cut off its resources. Europe's factories, already strained by energy shortages, depended heavily on African minerals. America's dollar-based dominance relied on access to cheap gold. The very architecture of Western power seemed fragile. Yet instead of seeking dialogue, Trump doubled down, vowing to use every tool to bring Africa back in line. But Traoré was ready. He reached out beyond Africa's borders, forming alliances that shocked Washington. Russia promised military and economic support. China offered new trade routes and financing. Even countries in Latin America expressed solidarity, seeing in Africa's struggle a mirror of their own battles against imperialism. Suddenly, Africa was no longer isolated. It was becoming a central player in a new global realignment. On the streets of Burkina Faso, the people's determination only grew stronger. Families painted murals of Traoré as a defender of sovereignty. Farmers pledged their harvest to support the resistance. Soldiers vowed loyalty to the cause, ready to protect their borders from any Western intervention. What had started as a tariff dispute had transformed into a movement of national pride. Western propaganda intensified. Reports claimed Burkina Faso was collapsing, that its economy was in ruins. Yet reality told another story. Local markets were vibrant, fueled by trade with new partners. Construction projects financed by non-Western allies were visible in the capital. And most importantly, the people themselves had faith. Faith that this was more than politics. It was destiny. Scholars began comparing Traoré to historic figures like Kwame Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara, and Patrice Lumumba. His speeches, fiery and uncompromising, echoed across Africa. They used our resources to build their wealth, he declared. Now we will use them to build our freedom. These words, carried through social media, ignited hope among millions of young Africans. A new generation began to believe that sovereignty was possible, that history could be rewritten. But the West was not giving up quietly. Sanctions hit Burkina Faso, cutting off banking systems and blocking trade routes. Western diplomats threatened coups and destabilization. Intelligence leaks suggested covert plans to undermine Traoré's government. Yet each attempt only seemed to strengthen his resolve. With every challenge, his popularity grew, not just at home, but across the entire continent. Economists now warn of a new global fracture. If Africa fully aligns with Russia and China, the West risks losing access to the raw materials that power modern technology. Lithium for batteries, cobalt for smartphones, gold for reserves, uranium for nuclear plants. The very foundation of Western prosperity could be shaken. The nightmare once whispered in Brussels had become real. And so, the world watches. Will the West escalate, risking direct conflict? Will Africa's unity hold under pressure? Or is this simply the beginning of a longer struggle for true independence? What is clear is that the old order is crumbling and a new force is rising. Ibrahim Traoré has shown that a single voice, backed by courage, can spark a continental awakening. The story is not over. In fact, it has only just begun. Africa stands at a crossroads, and the choice made today will shape the destiny of generations to come. Will the continent finally seize control of its wealth, its power, and its future? Or will the forces of empire drag it back into submission? Traoré's final words in his latest speech still ring across the Sahel. If they come with tariffs, we come with unity. If they come with sanctions, we come with resilience. If they come with war, we come with destiny. Africa will rise. And in that moment, the question becomes undeniable. Has the West's nightmare just begun?